Some nights I still hear the rain against my skin. Not on my skin, against it, like tiny bullets of disappointment that God Himself was shooting at me. My name is Nadine. I'm 57 years old, and this is the story of how I learned that sometimes the people who hurt us most are the ones we'd die for without thinking twice. I want you to picture me standing there, soaked to the bone, holding a phone in my trembling hands. Not my phone, his phone, my son's phone. The phone I'd driven across town to collect because Liam had forgotten it at some store downtown, and apparently the world would end if he didn't have it back by morning. The rain was the kind that makes you feel small and forgotten, the kind that soaks through your coat and into your soul. I'd been standing there for 20 minutes, knocking softly at first, then louder, calling his name through the door of what used to be our home, what used to be my sanctuary. Liam, sweetheart, I have your phone. It's raining pretty hard out here. Nothing. I pressed my ear against the cold wood, hearing the television inside, hearing his footsteps, hearing life continuing without me just a few inches away. My heart was beating so loud I thought surely he could hear it through the door. Surely he'd remember that mothers feel cold too, that mothers get tired too, that mothers need to come home too. But when his voice finally came through that door, it wasn't the voice of the little boy I'd rocked to sleep for years. It wasn't the voice of the child I'd sacrificed everything for, the child I'd chosen over every chance at happiness, every opportunity for love, every dream I'd ever had for myself. Forgot it again? Are you serious? Get out. You're useless. Useless. The word hit me harder than the rain ever could. If you're watching this and you've ever felt invisible in your own life, if you've ever wondered how love can turn into something so cold, please subscribe to our channel. We're working toward 1,000 subscribers and your support means everything. And comment below with what city you're watching from. I'd love to know you're out there, listening. 24 years earlier, I was a different woman. I was 33, newly divorced, with a 3-year-old son who looked at me like I hung the moon every morning. His father had walked out on us, said he never signed up for this kind of responsibility. But when I looked at Liam's chubby little hands reaching for me, when I saw those big brown eyes that trusted me completely, I thought, this is it. This is my purpose. This child will love me forever because I'm choosing him over everything else. I turned down David Martinez when he asked me to dinner that spring. David, with his kind smile and steady job at the post office, who'd been trying to win my heart for months. I can't, I told him, watching disappointment cloud his face. Liam needs stability right now. Maybe someday, but not now. Someday never came. I turned down Rebecca's invitation to start that catering business we'd dreamed about since high school. I can't leave Liam with babysitters all the time, I explained, even though the spark in her eyes when she talked about our recipes made me want to say yes so badly it hurt. Instead, I learned to sew. I turned our dining room into a workshop and took in alterations, wedding dresses, prom gowns, anything to keep money coming in while staying home for Liam. My fingers bled those first few months, pricked by needles and pins until they developed calluses thick enough to protect me. I thought those calluses were a badge of honor then. Now I know they were just the beginning of me learning to feel less pain. Every morning, I'd wake up before dawn to finish someone else's dress so I could walk Liam to school. Every evening, I'd put my sewing aside the moment he came through the door, ready to help with homework, to listen to stories about his day, to be whatever he needed me to be. "Mama," he'd say, climbing into my lap even when he was getting too big for it, "you're the best mama in the whole world." Those words were like oxygen to me. They made every sacrifice feel worth it. Every lonely night bearable. Every no I'd said to my own dreams seemed like the right choice. But children grow up. And sometimes, when they do, they forget that the person who gave up everything for them is still a human being with feelings, with needs, with a heart that can break just as easily as anyone else's. The first time Liam spoke to me with real cruelty, he was 16. I'd been working on a particularly difficult wedding dress, beadwork that required 12 hours of steady focus, and I'd forgotten to buy his favorite cereal. "Seriously, Mom? You had one job. One simple thing to remember, and you screwed it up." I looked up from my work, needle still in hand, expecting to see some hint of the little boy who used to apologize for accidentally stepping on ants. Instead, I saw cold eyes, a mouth set in the same line of disappointment I'd seen in his father's face all those years ago. "I'm sorry, sweetheart. I'll go get some right now. Don't bother. I'll figure it out myself. I always have to." The dismissal in his voice cut deeper than any needle ever had. But I told myself it was just teenage rebellion, that hormones and the stress of high school were making him say things he didn't mean. Mothers forgive, I reminded myself. That's what we do. If only I'd known that forgiveness without boundaries is just another word for permission to hurt you again. The years that followed became a slow erosion of everything I'd built my identity on. Every time I reached out, Liam seemed to step further away. Every sacrifice I made was met with expectation rather than gratitude. Every attempt to share in his life was treated as an intrusion. "Mom, you don't understand anything about my world," became his favorite phrase, said with the kind of weary patience you'd use with a child who kept asking why the sky is blue. But I kept trying. When he went to college, I sent care packages every month. When he called, which wasn't often, I listened to him complain about professors, roommates, the unfairness of having to do his own laundry. I never once mentioned how quiet the house had become without him, how I'd started talking to myself just to hear a human voice during dinner. When he graduated and moved 3 states away for a job, I told myself this was what success looked like. This was what I'd raised him for, to be independent, to make his own way in the world. The fact that he called less and less, visited even more rarely, was just proof that I'd done my job well. Except late at night, when the house was so quiet I could hear my own heartbeat, I'd wonder if this was what love was supposed to feel like. If devotion was supposed to leave you feeling so empty, so forgotten. Then, 2 years ago, everything changed again. Liam lost his job. His savings ran out. His apartment became too expensive. And suddenly, after years of barely acknowledging my existence, he needed me again. "I'll just stay for a few months, Mom. Just until I get back on my feet." 24 years old, my successful, independent son was coming home. I should have been happy. Part of me was. But there was another part, a part I tried to ignore, that whispered a warning I wasn't ready to hear. The son who returned to me wasn't the boy I'd raised, or even the distant young man who'd left. This was someone harder, someone angrier, someone who seemed to blame the world, including me, for his failures. Within a week, I understood that I wasn't getting my son back. I was getting a stranger who happened to live in my house and expected to be taken care of like a child while being spoken to like an adult. But that night in the rain, standing outside my own home, holding his forgotten phone like some kind of offering to an indifferent god, that was the night I finally heard the truth that had been whispering to me for years. Love shouldn't feel like drowning, and I was tired of holding my breath. That night, shivering in my wet clothes after finally being allowed back into my own home, I made myself a cup of tea with hands that wouldn't stop trembling. Not from the cold. I'd warmed up by then. From something deeper. Something that had been shaking loose inside me for months without me wanting to admit it. Liam had gone to his room without a word, without even a glance at the woman who'd just driven 40 minutes through a storm to retrieve something he'd carelessly left behind. The phone, his precious lifeline to a world that apparently mattered more than his mother, sat on the kitchen counter where I'd placed it, water still dripping from the plastic case I'd tried so hard to keep dry. I stared at that phone for a long time, remembering when he was little and phones were just things that hung on kitchen walls. When the most important conversations he had were with me, sitting at this same table, telling me about his day over milk and cookies I'd baked while he was at school. "Mama, guess what happened today?" he used to say, eyes bright with excitement over the smallest things. A butterfly he'd seen at recess, a story his teacher had read, a friend who'd shared lunch with him. Now our conversations, when they happened at all, felt like business transactions. Him telling me what he needed, me figuring out how to provide it, him disappearing back into his room without so much as a thank you. The change hadn't happened overnight. That would have been easier to understand, easier to fight against. Instead, it had been like watching someone you love slowly sink into quicksand while they blamed you for not throwing the rope fast enough. It started small, the way cruelty always does. Little comments that stung but could be explained away. "Mom, you really don't need to wait up for me. It's kind of pathetic." Or, Could you maybe not hum while you're cooking? Some of us are trying to think. I told myself he was stressed from the job search, frustrated with his circumstances, taking it out on the safest target, me, the person who would never stop loving him, no matter how he treated me. The person who had spent 24 years proving that my love was unconditional. I was beginning to understand that unconditional love, when it's not reciprocated, becomes something else entirely. It becomes permission for someone to treat you however they want, secure in the knowledge that you'll always forgive them, always be there, always make excuses for their behavior. The morning after the phone incident, I woke up early as always and started breakfast. Over the years, I'd learned exactly how Liam liked his eggs. Over easy, but not too runny. Toast golden brown, not dark. Coffee strong enough to wake the dead because hangovers had become a regular part of his routine since moving back home. I heard him moving around upstairs, the familiar sound of his footsteps across the floor of what used to be his childhood bedroom, the same room where I'd read him bedtime stories, where I'd sat beside his bed during countless sick nights, where I'd helped him with homework and listened to his dreams about what he wanted to be when he grew up. He'd wanted to be a superhero back then. "So I can protect you, Mama," he'd said with the fierce certainty of a 6-year-old who believed love was stronger than anything in the world. Now he came downstairs like a storm cloud, all darkness and barely contained irritation, as if the sight of me in my own kitchen was an offense to his sensibilities. "Morning, sweetheart," I said, the word sweetheart feeling more and more like a lie every time it left my lips. "I made your favorite breakfast." He looked at the plate I'd prepared with the same expression someone might wear when examining roadkill. "I'm not hungry. But you always eat breakfast. You said it was the most important meal of the day, remember? You used to tell me that." The look he gave me could have frozen July. "That was when I was a kid, Mom. Kids say a lot of stupid things. Stupid things. Like telling your mother you love her. Like saying thank you for sacrifices she doesn't have to make. Like believing that family means something more than shared DNA and legal obligations." He grabbed his phone from the counter, the phone that had cost me a night of pneumonia-inducing rain, and headed for the door. "Where are you going?" I asked, hating how the question sounded. Needy, clingy, like the pathetic old woman he apparently saw when he looked at me. "Out. I have things to do. People to see. You know, a life that doesn't revolve around this house. This house. Not home. Not our place. This house." As if it was just a building he happened to be temporarily occupying, rather than the place where someone had loved him unconditionally for 2 decades. "Will you be back for dinner? I could make that pasta dish you used to love." Used to. Past tense, Mom. I used to love a lot of things. That doesn't mean I still do. The door slammed behind him, and I stood there in my kitchen, surrounded by the breakfast he'd rejected, feeling like I'd just been slapped. Not physically. Liam had never raised a hand to me. But there are other ways to hurt someone, other ways to make them feel small and worthless and completely disposable. I threw the eggs away and sat at the table with just my coffee, staring at the empty chair across from me. 24 years ago, when his father left, I'd made a promise to that chair. I'd sworn that I would be enough, mother and father, provider and protector, everything Liam needed to become a good man. Somewhere along the way, I'd failed, but I couldn't figure out where, couldn't pinpoint the moment when my love had stopped being enough and started being too much. The days blended together after that. Liam would leave early and come back late, usually smelling like alcohol and disappointment. He'd raid the refrigerator for whatever I'd prepared, eat standing up at the counter like he was in a hurry to be anywhere else, and disappear back into his room without a word. When he did speak to me, it was usually to complain about something I'd done wrong. The towels weren't soft enough. The internet was too slow. I was out of his favorite shampoo. I made too much noise in the morning when he was trying to sleep. "Could you maybe be a little more considerate?" he said one Tuesday morning when I'd apparently committed the crime of running the vacuum cleaner before noon. Some of us had a late night. "I'm sorry. I was just trying to keep the house clean. I thought I'd appreciate some peace and quiet. Is that too much to ask?" It wasn't too much to ask. What was too much to ask was for my own son to speak to me like I was a human being, instead of hired help he was dissatisfied with. What was too much to ask was for a little gratitude, a little recognition that every comfort he enjoyed in this house came from my work, my sacrifice, my refusal to give up on him even when he'd clearly given up on me. But I didn't say any of that. I just apologized again and put the vacuum away, adding his need for quiet to the growing list of ways I was supposed to make myself smaller, less noticeable, less inconvenient in my own home. The worst part wasn't the words he said or even the words he didn't say. The worst part was the way he looked at me, or rather, the way he didn't look at me. I'd become invisible to him, a background presence whose only value was in what services I could provide. When Mrs. Patterson from next door stopped by to return a casserole dish, she asked about Liam with the kind of bright interest that neighbors show when they're being polite. "How's your boy doing? It must be so nice to have him home again." I opened my mouth to give the automatic response. "Fine. Wonderful. Such a blessing to have him back." But the words stuck in my throat like lies too big to swallow. "He's adjusting," I finally managed. Mrs. Patterson's smile faltered slightly. She was 73 years old and had raised 4 children of her own. Something in my face must have told her a story I wasn't ready to speak out loud. "Sometimes they need time," she said gently. "Sometimes coming home feels like failure to them, even when it's not." I nodded, grateful for her kindness, but knowing she didn't understand the full picture. This wasn't about Liam feeling like a failure. This was about him treating me like I was one. That evening, I made his favorite dinner anyway, pot roast with all the vegetables, the recipe I'd perfected over years of Sunday dinners when he was growing up. I set the table with the good dishes, lit a candle, tried to create the kind of warm, welcoming atmosphere that might remind him we were family. He came home at 8:30, 3 hours after I'd expected him. The pot roast was dry by then, the vegetables overcooked, but I heated everything up anyway and called him to the table. "What's all this?" he asked, looking at the candle like it was something dangerous. "I made your favorite. I thought maybe we could have dinner together, catch up a little bit." He sat down with the kind of resigned sigh people use when they're being forced to endure something unpleasant. He ate in silence while I tried to make conversation, asking about his day, his plans, anything that might get him to engage with me like I was a person instead of a waitress he couldn't get rid of. "This meat is tough," he said finally, not looking up from his plate. Not, "Thank you for cooking." Not, "I appreciate you making my favorite meal." Just criticism, delivered with the casual cruelty of someone who had stopped seeing the person behind the service. "I'm sorry. I had it ready at 5:30, but you weren't home yet, so I kept it warm. Maybe next time if you could just call. Maybe next time don't assume I want to eat at 5:30 like some old person." Old person. I was 57 years old, and to my 24-year-old son, that apparently made me ancient, out of touch, irrelevant to his world and his needs. I finished my dinner in silence after that, tasting nothing, feeling like I was chewing cardboard. When he pushed his plate away half empty and left the table without another word, I sat there alone with the flickering candle, wondering when exactly I'd stopped being his mother and become just another disappointment in his life. That night, I lay in bed listening to him on the phone in his room, his voice animated and warm as he talked to friends who apparently deserved the kindness he no longer had for me. I heard him laugh, actually laugh, for the first time in weeks. The sound broke something in me that I'd been trying so hard to keep whole. That laughter, that warmth, that engaging personality that had made him the center of my world for 24 years, it still existed. He just didn't think I was worth sharing it with anymore. I cried into my pillow that night, quietly, so he wouldn't hear. Not because I was sad, though I was. Because I was angry. Angrier than I'd been in years. And for the first time since he'd come home, I let myself think the thought I'd been pushing away for months. Maybe loving someone wasn't enough if they'd decided you weren't worth loving back. 3 weeks after the dinner incident, I did something I hadn't done in months. I bought myself flowers. They were nothing fancy, just a small bouquet of daisies from the grocery store, marked down because they were a day past their prime. But they were bright and cheerful, and when I arranged them in the blue vase that had been my mother's, they made the kitchen feel less like a place where I served ungrateful meals and more like a home where someone might actually want to spend time. I was humming while I arranged them, something I used to do all the time before I learned it was apparently too annoying for Liam to tolerate. For just a moment, I felt like myself again, not the invisible servant I'd become, but Nadine, a woman who deserved small, beautiful things in her life. What are those for? Liam's voice cut through my moment of peace like a blade. I turned around, still holding one of the daisies, surprised by the question. They're just flowers, sweetheart. I thought they'd brighten up the kitchen. He looked at the modest bouquet like I'd brought home a dead animal. You bought flowers? For yourself? There was something in his tone that made me feel defensive, though I couldn't understand why. Yes, I bought myself flowers. Is there something wrong with that? It's just weird, Mom. Like, who buys themselves flowers? That's something other people do for you when they actually care about you. The words hit their target with surgical precision. Other people. People who actually cared about me. The implication was clear. He didn't. And apparently, no one else did either. So who was I kidding with this pathetic display of self-care? I just thought they were pretty, I said quietly, my voice smaller than I'd intended. They're a waste of money. You're always complaining about being tight on budget, and then you spend money on dead plants that'll be in the trash in a week. I wanted to remind him that the budget was tight because I was supporting 2 adults on 1 income, while he looked for work, a process that seemed to involve a lot of sleeping late, playing video games, and going out with friends whose parents were apparently more financially successful than his pathetic mother. I wanted to tell him that these flowers cost less than one of the craft beers he helped himself to from my refrigerator every night. I wanted to explain that sometimes a woman needs to remind herself she's worth something beautiful, even if, especially if, no one else seems to think so. Instead, I just nodded and said, "You're probably right. I wasn't thinking." But I didn't throw the flowers away. I moved them to my bedroom dresser, where they could make me smile without offending him with their presence. That night, as I was getting ready for bed, I caught sight of myself in the mirror above the dresser. The woman looking back at me was a stranger. Tired eyes, shoulders permanently hunched from carrying invisible weight, mouth set in a line of perpetual apology. When had I started looking so defeated? When had I begun taking up so little space in my own life? The flowers sat beside my reflection, already beginning to droop despite my careful tending. Maybe Liam was right. Maybe they were just dead plants waiting to be thrown away. Maybe I was too. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of voices in the kitchen. Not unusual. Liam often talked on the phone during breakfast, conducting his social life while I provided the domestic services that made it possible. But this time, there were 2 voices, and one of them I didn't recognize. I put on my robe and went downstairs to find Liam sitting at the table with a young woman I'd never seen before. She was pretty in the effortless way that 20-somethings are pretty, with long, dark hair and clothes that probably cost more than I spent on groceries in a month. They were both eating from the breakfast I'd prepared before going upstairs to shower. Eggs, bacon, toast, fresh fruit that I'd gotten up early to cut and arrange attractively. The kind of spread I'd been making for Liam every morning since he moved back home, hoping that starting his day with care and abundance might soften the edges of his perpetual irritation with me. "Oh," I said, suddenly conscious of my old robe and uncombed hair. "I didn't realize we had company." The girl looked up at me with polite curiosity, but Liam barely glanced in my direction. "Mom, this is Jessica. Jessica, this is my mom. Not, this is my mother, who made this delicious breakfast you're enjoying. Not, this is the woman whose home you're sitting in. Just, this is my mom," like I was a piece of furniture that occasionally required acknowledgement. "Nice to meet you, Mrs. Morrison," Jessica said with a smile that seemed genuine enough. "Thank you for breakfast. Everything is delicious. At least someone had been raised with manners." "You're welcome, dear. Are you one of Liam's friends from college?" "We met at Murphy's," Liam answered before Jessica could respond, referring to the bar where he spent most of his evenings. "She's in marketing." The way he said marketing carried the weight of respect I never heard when he talked about my work. Sewing, apparently, wasn't a real profession in his eyes, despite the fact that it had kept a roof over his head for his entire life. I stood there in my own kitchen, feeling like an intruder, while they continued their conversation about people I didn't know and places I'd never been. Every few minutes, Jessica would try to include me, asking if I'd lived in town long, commenting on how nice the house was, making the kind of small talk that well-bred people make with their boyfriends' mothers. But Liam would redirect her attention back to him each time, as if my participation in the conversation was an embarrassing interruption rather than a natural part of social interaction. "We should probably get going," he finally said, standing and stretching like he'd just woken up, despite the fact that it was nearly noon. I told Marcus we'd meet him at 2. Jessica began clearing her dishes, an automatic courtesy that touched me more than it should have. "Should I help with cleanup?" she asked me. "Oh no, dear, that's not necessary. I'll take care of it." "See?" Liam said to Jessica with a laugh that sounded fond but felt sharp. "She lives for this stuff. Gives her something to do. Lives for this stuff. As if washing dishes and cleaning up after other people was my greatest passion, rather than simply the endless, thankless labor that kept his world functioning smoothly. As if I didn't have dreams, interests, desires beyond serving as his unpaid housekeeper." Jessica looked slightly uncomfortable, like she sensed something off in his tone but wasn't sure what. "Well, it was really nice to meet you, Mrs. Morrison. Thank you again for breakfast." "You're welcome anytime, sweetheart." After they left, I sat at the table surrounded by the remains of their meal, feeling more alone than I had when the house was actually empty. There's something particularly isolating about being invisible to someone while they're sitting 3 feet away from you, about being reduced to a service provider in your own home. I thought about how Liam had looked at Jessica, really looked at her, with attention and interest and the kind of engagement I remembered from when he was little and would tell me about his day. His whole face had been animated when he talked to her, warm and funny and charming. All the qualities that had made me so proud to be his mother were still there. He just didn't think I deserved to see them anymore. That afternoon, while doing the laundry, his laundry, because apparently moving back home meant returning to the privilege of having someone else handle your basic adult responsibilities, I found a crumpled piece of paper in his jeans pocket. I wasn't snooping. I've always checked pockets before washing clothes, a habit left over from his childhood when I'd find everything from toys to homework assignments mixed in with the dirty clothes. But this time, instead of finding spare change or forgotten receipts, I found something that stopped me cold. It was a job application, filled out in his handwriting but never submitted. The position was for an entry-level marketing role at a company downtown. Not glamorous work, but steady income, benefits, the kind of job that could be a stepping stone to something better. The application was dated 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks ago, when he'd told me he was still looking and needed just a little more time to get back on his feet. 3 weeks ago, when I'd given him gas money to network and interview for positions that apparently only existed in his imagination. He'd filled out the entire application, references, work history, even a cover letter attached to the back. Everything was complete except for one crucial detail. He'd never turned it in. I stared at that paper for a long time, trying to understand. Had he changed his mind about the job? Decided it wasn't good enough for him? Found something better? Or had he simply decided that living rent-free in his mother's house, being fed and cleaned up after and supported without contributing anything in return, was too comfortable an arrangement to give up? The possibility that my son was choosing to remain unemployed, choosing to let me struggle financially while he enjoyed an extended vacation from responsibility, was almost too painful to consider. But the evidence was right there in my hands, written in his own careful handwriting. That evening, I waited for him to come home, the application burning like a secret in my pocket. When he finally walked through the door at nearly midnight, I was still sitting at the kitchen table, mending a dress that was due the next day. "You're up late," he said, heading straight for the refrigerator. "I found something when I was doing laundry today," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. He froze with his hand on the refrigerator door. "Found what?" I pulled out the application and set it on the table between us. "This was in your jeans pocket." He looked at the paper like it might bite him, then back at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Guilt? Annoyance? Defiance? So it's a job application from 3 weeks ago, a job you never applied for. I changed my mind about it. It wasn't a good fit. "Liam, it's an entry-level position. You have to start somewhere. I have to start somewhere that's worth my education and experience. I'm not going to take some dead-end job just because you're impatient for me to move out." The accusation hit like a slap. Impatient. As if wanting my adult son to contribute to his own life was some kind of character flaw on my part. I'm not impatient. I'm concerned. About you, about your future. About your wallet, you mean. The words hung in the air between us. Ugly and sharp and impossible to take back. He was accusing me of caring more about money than about his well-being, when the truth was I'd been sacrificing my own financial stability for months to support his refusal to accept reality. That's not fair, I said quietly. Isn't it? You've been dropping hints about money constantly, about how tight things are, how much everything costs, how hard you're working. I get it, Mom. You want me gone. I want you to be independent. I want you to be happy and successful, and you want your house back, your routine back, your pathetic little life back without me complicating it. Pathetic little life. The phrase lodged itself in my chest like a splinter, sharp and painful and impossible to ignore. Is that really how he saw me? How he'd always seen me? My pathetic little life is what's kept you fed and housed for 24 years, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. And you've never let me forget it, have you? Poor Nadine. Sacrificed everything for her ungrateful son. Well, congratulations, Mom. You've got your victim story all figured out. He walked out of the kitchen then, leaving me alone with the job application and the devastating realization that somewhere along the way, my love had become a weapon he used against me. My sacrifices twisted into evidence of my martyrdom complex, rather than proof of my devotion. I sat there until dawn, staring at that piece of paper, wondering when exactly my son had stopped being someone I recognized and started being someone who could look at 24 years of love and see only manipulation and guilt. The flowers on my dresser upstairs were completely dead by then, but I still couldn't bring myself to throw them away. 2 days after our confrontation about the job application, I woke up to silence. Not the comfortable quiet of a peaceful morning, but the hollow emptiness that comes when something important has been removed from your world without warning. My sewing machine was gone. I stood in the doorway of what used to be my workroom, staring at the empty space where my singer had sat for 15 years. The singer that had paid for Liam's school clothes, his textbooks, his graduation dinner, his security deposit when he'd first moved out. The singer that had been my partner through countless late nights, my source of income and independence and pride. Gone. The thread rack still hung on the wall, dozens of spools in every color imaginable, but they looked lost and purposeless without the machine that gave them meaning. My cutting table remained, covered with the dress I'd been working on, Mrs. Chen's daughter's prom dress, due in 3 days. Half finished, with intricate beadwork that required the precision only my reliable singer could provide. I found Liam in the kitchen, eating cereal from the bowl and scrolling through his phone like this was just another ordinary Tuesday morning. Where is my sewing machine? My voice was calm, though everything inside me was screaming. He didn't look up from his phone. I sold it. 3 words, delivered with the casual indifference of someone commenting on the weather. You sold it? You sold my sewing machine? Relax, Mom. I got $800 for it. Some lady on Craigslist was looking for that exact model. He finally glanced up, and I saw something in his eyes I'd never seen before. Not just indifference, but a cold satisfaction, like he'd been planning this moment and enjoying the anticipation. I figured you weren't using it much anyway. Wasn't using it much. I had been working on it until 11 o'clock the night before. There were 3 dresses waiting to be finished, 2 alterations due by the weekend, and a wedding dress consultation scheduled for Thursday. Liam, that machine is how I make money. How I pay for everything. The groceries you eat, the electricity that powers your video games, the phone bill for the phone you made me drive across town to get. Yeah, well, now you don't have to worry about any of that. He stood up, rinsing his bowl with the same methodical care he used for everything that benefited him while ignoring everything that benefited me. I took care of the electric bill and bought groceries. We're even. As if $800 could compensate for destroying my livelihood, my independence, my ability to support us both, as if taking away the one thing that made me feel capable and productive was somehow a favor he was doing for me. You can't just sell my things without asking me. That machine. Liam, I need that machine. Mrs. Chen is expecting her daughter's dress by Friday. I have commitments, obligations. Had. You had commitments. Now you can focus on more important things. More important than earning money? More important than paying our bills? He turned around then, and the look on his face was one I'd never seen before. Not anger, not frustration, but something colder. Something that looked almost like hatred. More important than pretending you're some kind of businesswoman when you're really just an old lady playing dress-up with other people's clothes. Old lady playing dress-up. 15 years of building a reputation, of mastering complicated techniques, of taking pride in work that required skill and artistry and patience, reduced to the cruel imagination of a child playing pretend. I felt something break inside me, not dramatically but quietly, like the sound a wishbone makes when it finally gives way under too much pressure. "I'm calling Mrs. Chen," I said quietly. "I need to explain why I can't finish her daughter's dress." "Don't be so dramatic. She'll understand. People like her have money. They can find someone else. People like her. As opposed to people like me, apparently. People who couldn't afford to have their source of income arbitrarily eliminated by someone who'd never worked for anything in his life." The phone call was one of the most humiliating experiences of my 57 years. Mrs. Chen had been so excited about the dress, had trusted me with her daughter's most important high school milestone, had already told her friends about the beautiful work I was doing. "I'm so sorry," I said, my voice barely steady enough to be understood. "There's been a family emergency, and I won't be able to complete the dress in time for prom." The disappointment in her voice was devastating, but worse was her kindness. "Oh, Nadine, I'm so sorry to hear that. Is there anything I can do to help? If you need more time, Sarah would understand." "No, I can't complete it at all. I'll refund your deposit, of course. $300 I didn't have. Would have to somehow find from grocery money and utility savings. Because my word was all I had left, and I wouldn't let Liam's cruelty make me a liar, too." After I hung up, I sat at the kitchen table and cried. Not the quiet, hidden tears I'd been shedding for months, but deep, wrenching sobs that came from a place so raw I didn't know it existed. Liam found me there an hour later, still sitting with Mrs. Chen's deposit check in my trembling hands. "You're being ridiculous," he said, opening the refrigerator to survey the groceries he'd bought with money stolen from my future. "It's not like you were making real money anyway. This is better for everyone." "How is this better? How is taking away my ability to work better for anyone? Because now you can stop pretending to be something you're not and focus on what you're actually good at." "Which is what, exactly?" "Taking care of me, being my mom. That's what you've always wanted anyway, right? To be needed?" The words hit me like a physical blow. Being needed. As if my entire identity, my whole sense of worth, should revolve around serving someone who treated me with less respect than he'd show a stranger on the street. "I am your mother," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "But I'm also a person. I'm also someone with skills and interests and—" "You're 57 years old, Mom. You're not going to become some famous fashion designer. You're not going to build some empire. You're just going to keep hemming other people's dresses until your eyes get too bad to see the stitches and your hands get too shaky to hold the needle. Until your eyes get too bad. Until your hands get too shaky." He was talking about my future like it was already over. Like I was just marking time until death came to collect someone who'd outlived her usefulness. At least when I was sewing, I felt like I was good at something. Like I mattered. "You matter to me." The lie was so casual, so effortless, that for a moment I almost believed it. Almost let myself think that somewhere underneath all this cruelty was the boy who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms, who used to hold my hand in parking lots, who used to tell me I was the best mama in the world. "If I matter to you, then why do you treat me like I'm nothing?" He was quiet for a long moment, and I held my breath, hoping that maybe, finally, he would see what he'd been doing to me. Maybe he would remember who we used to be to each other. "Because you let me," he said finally. "Because you've never expected anything better from me, so why would I give it?" The honesty was more devastating than any lie could have been. He was telling me that my unconditional love, my refusal to abandon him no matter how badly he treated me, had become permission for him to treat me worse. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to him laughing on the phone with friends who apparently found his company delightful. The same laugh I used to treasure, now just another reminder of all the warmth and joy he shared with everyone except me. I thought about the sewing machine, probably sitting in some stranger's house by now, threading fabric for someone else's dreams while mine dissolved into nothing. I thought about Mrs. Chen's daughter, who would have to find another dress for the most important dance of her young life, because my son had decided my work didn't matter. I thought about the woman I used to be, not perfect, not without flaws, but someone who took pride in her abilities, who contributed something meaningful to the world, who had reasons to get up in the morning beyond serving someone who saw her as an inconvenience. Somewhere in the darkness of that endless night, I made a decision that scared me more than anything I'd ever contemplated. Not a dramatic decision, not a grand gesture of defiance, but something quiet and fundamental that would change everything. I decided to stop apologizing for existing. I decided that maybe, just maybe, being needed wasn't enough anymore. Maybe I needed to need myself. Maybe love without respect wasn't love at all, but something else entirely. Something that had been slowly killing the person I used to be, one small surrender at a time. The next morning, I didn't make Liam breakfast. For the first time in months, I made coffee for one person and sat at the table alone, eating toast and planning. When he came downstairs expecting his usual spread of eggs and bacon and fresh fruit, he found me reading the classified ads with a pen in my hand, circling possibilities. "Where's breakfast?" he asked, genuinely confused, like he'd discovered the sun had forgotten to rise. "I'm not hungry," I said without looking up from the paper. "There's cereal in the cabinet, eggs in the refrigerator. You know where everything is. But you always make breakfast." "I used to make breakfast. That doesn't mean I always will." He stood there for a moment, waiting for me to crack, to jump up and apologize and rush to fix him something to eat. When I didn't, when I just kept reading job listings and circling phone numbers, he made an irritated noise and stomped back upstairs. An hour later, he came back down dressed for going out. "I'm meeting Jessica for lunch," he announced, like he was doing me a favor by sharing his schedule. "That's nice," I said, still focused on the newspaper. "Don't you want to know where we're going? When I'll be back?" "Not particularly. You're an adult. I'm sure you can manage your own schedule." He waited for more, for questions about his plans or offers to pack him snacks or reminders to be careful. When none came, when I just kept reading like his presence was neither required nor particularly interesting, something shifted in his expression. "What's wrong with you today?" I looked up at him then, really looked at him, and saw something I hadn't noticed before. Uncertainty. As if my sudden indifference was more unsettling than years of my desperate attempts to please him had been. "Nothing's wrong with me," I said calmly. "I'm just tired." "Tired of what?" I folded the newspaper carefully, stood up, and looked at my son. This man who had taken everything I'd offered and decided it still wasn't enough to earn basic courtesy in return. Tired of pretending that being treated badly is the same thing as being loved. And for the first time in months, I left the room while he was still standing there, mouth open, trying to figure out what had just happened to the mother who used to live for his approval. But I still had something they'd forgotten about, something that was about to change everything. The thing they'd forgotten about was sitting in a shoebox on the top shelf of my bedroom closet, underneath old photo albums and Christmas decorations that hadn't seen daylight in years. I hadn't touched it in months. Hadn't even thought about it since Liam moved back home, and my world shrank down to the size of his needs and demands. But that morning, after I'd watched him storm out of the house confused and angry that his personal servant had suddenly developed boundaries, I climbed up on the chair I used to reach high shelves and pulled down that dusty shoebox. Inside were business cards, dozens of them, collected over 15 years of sewing for women who appreciated craftsmanship. Women who had pressed my card into their friends' hands and said, "Call Nadine, she's amazing." Women who had recommended me for their daughters' proms, their sisters' weddings, their mothers' special occasions. And there, underneath all those business cards, was the one I was looking for. Elena Vasquez, owner of Threads and Dreams, the upscale boutique downtown where wealthy women bought the kind of clothes I'd been making in my dining room for a fraction of the price. Elena had approached me 2 years ago at Sarah Martinez's wedding. Sarah, whose dress I'd created from a sketch she'd found in a magazine, transforming her vision into reality with silk and pearls, and hundreds of tiny hand-sewn beads that caught the light like stars. "I've been watching your work," Elena had said, elegant in the way that successful women are elegant, confident without being harsh. "Several of my clients have mentioned you. We should talk." But when she'd offered me a position at her boutique, full-time benefits, a chance to work with the finest fabrics and most sophisticated clients, I'd turned her down. Liam was in his final year of college then, and I'd convinced myself he needed me available. What if he called and needed advice? What if he got sick? What if he came home unexpectedly and I wasn't there? "I can't commit to full-time right now," I'd told Elena, apologizing for wasting her time, for not being the woman she needed. "Maybe in a few years, when things are more settled." She'd understood, had given me her card anyway. "When you're ready," she'd said. "Good seamstresses are hard to find. Great ones are irreplaceable." Now, holding that card in my hands, I wondered if 2 years was too long to wait, if opportunities like this came around more than once in a lifetime, if Elena even remembered the woman who'd turned down her offer to stay home and wait for a son who barely acknowledged her existence. There was only one way to find out. I dialed the number before I could change my mind, my fingers trembling only slightly as I listened to the phone ring. Once, twice, 3 times. "Threads and Dreams. This is Elena." Her voice was exactly as I remembered, warm but professional, the voice of someone who made decisions quickly and didn't waste time on regrets. "Elena, this is Nadine Morrison. We met at Sarah Martinez's wedding about 2 years ago. You offered me a position at your boutique." There was a pause, and I held my breath, preparing for polite confusion or professional dismissal. 2 years was a long time in business. People moved on. Positions were filled. "Nadine, of course I remember you. That dress you made for Sarah was extraordinary. I still have clients asking me who designed it." Relief flooded through me like warm water. "I was wondering if you might still have an opening. My circumstances have changed, and I'm able to commit to full-time work now. Actually, this is perfect timing. My senior seamstress just gave her notice. She's moving to Phoenix to be closer to her grandchildren. I've been dreading the search for someone with her skill level. When can you come in? When can you come in? Not if I was still interested. Not whether I was qualified. When? Today?" The word slipped out before I could stop it, sounding desperate and eager in a way that probably wasn't very professional. Elena laughed, and there was something reassuring about the sound. "I like enthusiasm. How about 3 o'clock? We can talk details, and I can show you the workspace. Fair warning, it's not a dining room operation. We work with clients who expect perfection and aren't shy about paying for it." Perfection. For the first time in months, the word didn't sound like criticism, but like possibility. After I hung up, I sat on my bed holding Elena's card and trying to remember the last time I'd felt excited about something. Not nervous or anxious or desperate, but actually excited, anticipatory, hopeful. I couldn't remember. I spent the rest of the morning doing something I hadn't done in years, preparing for an interview. Not that Elena had called it an interview, but that's what it was. A chance to present myself as someone worth investing in, someone capable of more than hemming pants and taking abuse from ungrateful family members. I tried on 3 different outfits before settling on a navy blue dress I'd made for myself the previous spring, back when I'd still believed that making beautiful things for myself was an acceptable use of time and materials. It was simple but well constructed, with hand-finished seams and a perfect fit that showcased my understanding of how clothes should move with a woman's body. Looking at myself in the mirror, I was surprised to see traces of the woman I used to be. The woman who took pride in her appearance, who understood that presenting yourself well was a form of self-respect rather than vanity. When had I stopped caring how I looked? When had I started dressing like someone whose only purpose was to be invisible while serving others? I was putting on lipstick, actual lipstick, for the first time in months, when I heard Liam come home. His footsteps on the stairs were heavier than usual, accompanied by voices I didn't recognize. Male voices, laughing about something I couldn't make out through the walls. Part of me wanted to go see what was happening, to check if he needed anything, to fall back into the familiar pattern of making sure his world was functioning smoothly. But I looked at myself in the mirror. really looked at the woman in the navy dress with lipstick and hope in her eyes, and decided that whatever Liam needed, he could figure it out himself. I had somewhere to be, someone to become. Threads and Dreams occupied a corner building in the historic district downtown, its windows displaying garments that looked like art rather than mere clothing, evening gowns in jewel tones, wedding dresses that seemed to float on their invisible mannequins, cocktail dresses with beadwork so intricate it must have taken weeks to complete. Standing outside, looking at that display, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Recognition. Not of the specific garments, but of the level of craftsmanship, the attention to detail, the understanding that clothes could be more than functional items. They could be expressions of beauty, confidence, dreams made tangible. Elena met me at the door, and I was struck again by how she carried herself. Not arrogant, but assured. Comfortable in her own skin in a way I'd forgotten was possible. "Nadine, you look wonderful. Come in. Let me show you around." The interior was even more impressive than the window display. Fabric samples in every texture and color imaginable lined one wall, while another showcased photographs of satisfied clients at weddings, galas, and other events where looking exceptional wasn't optional, but essential. "We serve a very specific clientele," Elena explained as we walked through the main showroom. "Women who understand that quality costs more, but lasts longer. Women who would rather own 3 perfect dresses than 20 mediocre ones." She led me to the back of the store, where the real work happened. The sewing room was a seamstress's dream. Natural light from large windows, cutting tables at the perfect height. Industrial machines capable of handling everything from delicate silk to heavy brocade. "This would be your station," Elena said, gesturing to a workspace that was larger and better equipped than anything I'd ever had access to. "The senior seamstress position involves more than just construction. You'd also consult directly with clients, help them understand what styles work best for their bodies and lifestyles, occasionally design custom pieces for special occasions." Custom design. The phrase sent a thrill through me that I tried to keep from showing on my face. I'd been making other people's visions come to life for so long, I'd almost forgotten I had creative ideas of my own. "What happened to your previous seamstress?" I asked, running my hand along the smooth surface of the cutting table. "Retirement, mostly. Margaret was with me for 8 years, helped build our reputation for excellence. She trained several younger seamstresses over the years, but none of them had her instinct for what makes a garment special versus what makes it merely adequate." Elena paused, studying my face with the kind of attention I hadn't received in months from anyone. "I remember watching you at Sarah's wedding, how you kept adjusting small details throughout the reception. A seam that had shifted slightly, a piece of beading that needed repositioning. Most people would never have noticed, but you cared enough about your work to make sure it was perfect even when no one was looking." Even when no one was looking. The phrase hit me with unexpected force. When had I stopped caring about things when no one was looking? When had I started measuring my worth only by other people's recognition, rather than by my own standards of excellence? "The position comes with a substantial salary increase over what most seamstresses earn," Elena continued, naming a figure that was nearly triple what I'd been making from my dining room operation, plus benefits, paid vacation, and a clothing allowance so you can wear examples of our work. A clothing allowance. Money specifically designated for making myself look professional and confident. The concept was so foreign to my current reality that I almost laughed. "When would you need an answer?" I asked, trying to sound professional rather than desperately eager. "How about you start Monday? I can tell from your work that you understand quality. And right now, I need someone who can hit the ground running. We have a trunk show next month featuring some of our best pieces, and I'd love to have you involved in the preparation. Start Monday. 5 days from now, I could be working in this beautiful space, creating beautiful things for women who appreciated artistry, earning enough money to support myself without depending on anyone else's grudging charity." "Yes," I said, the word coming out stronger and more certain than I'd felt about anything in years. "Yes. I'd like that very much." Elena smiled, the kind of smile that successful women give each other when they recognize a fellow survivor. "Excellent. I'll have the paperwork ready for Monday morning. 9 o'clock sharp. We open early for clients who need to fit appointments around demanding schedules." demanding schedules. A world where people had important places to be, meaningful work to do, lives that mattered enough to require careful time management. I was going to be part of that world again. Walking back to my car, I caught my reflection in a storefront window and was surprised by what I saw. The woman looking back at me stood straighter, moved with more purpose, had an expression of quiet confidence that I hadn't seen in my own face for longer than I cared to admit. This was what hope looked like, I realized. Not the desperate, grasping hope I'd been carrying for months. Hope that Liam would change, that our relationship would improve, that somehow love would be enough to heal the damage we'd done to each other. This was different. This was hope based on my own actions, my own decisions, my own ability to create change rather than waiting for it to be given to me. I drove home slowly, taking the long way through neighborhoods I'd admired but never felt connected to. Tree-lined streets where women like Elena's clients lived. Women who understood that investing in yourself wasn't selfish but necessary. Soon, I would be able to afford a place in a neighborhood like this. Not immediately, but eventually. A small apartment with good light for reading, a balcony where I could drink coffee in the mornings, space that belonged entirely to me and reflected my taste rather than someone else's needs. The house was quiet when I arrived, but Liam's car was in the driveway along with another vehicle I didn't recognize. I could hear voices coming from the living room, his voice and at least two others, all of them laughing about something I wasn't part of and didn't need to be. For the first time in months, the sound of Liam's happiness didn't make me feel excluded or inadequate. It just made me realize how much energy I'd been wasting trying to earn a place in his life that he'd decided I didn't deserve. I went straight to my room and called Mrs. Chen. "Mrs. Chen, it's Nadine Morrison. I know I had to cancel Sarah's dress, but I wanted to let you know that I'm going to be working at Threads and Dreams downtown starting Monday. If Sarah still needs alterations or if you ever need anything in the future—" "Oh, Nadine!" Mrs. Chen's voice was warm with genuine pleasure. "How wonderful! Elena runs such a beautiful shop. Sarah will be so excited to know you're there. She's been talking about having you design something special for her college graduation. A custom design for college graduation. Work that mattered to someone who appreciated quality. Money earned through skill rather than charity." After I hung up, I sat on my bed and looked around the room that had been my refuge for so many months. Tomorrow, I would start the process of reclaiming my life. Monday, I would begin work that used my talents and paid me what those talents were worth. And someday soon, I would live in a space where being myself wasn't something I had to apologize for. But tonight, for the first time in longer than I could remember, I felt like celebrating. Not loudly, not dramatically, but quietly and with deep satisfaction. I was no longer just surviving. I was preparing to live. And the best part was that it had nothing to do with anyone else's approval or disapproval. This was mine. I had earned it, chosen it, made it happen through my own actions and decisions. It wasn't pain anymore. It was determination. And tomorrow, I would start building something that could never be taken away from me again. Friday morning, 3 days before I would start my new life at Threads and Dreams, I woke up at 5:30 and did something I hadn't done in over a year. I made breakfast for myself. Not the elaborate spread I'd been preparing for Liam every morning. Just scrambled eggs with fresh herbs from the windowsill garden I'd neglected since he moved back home. Toast made from bread I'd bought because I liked it rather than because it was on sale. I ate slowly, savoring each bite while reading a book I'd been meaning to finish for months. The silence in the kitchen wasn't lonely anymore. It was peaceful. It was mine. Liam appeared in the doorway at 8:15, hair disheveled, wearing the same clothes he'd had on yesterday. He looked around the kitchen with the confused expression of someone who'd expected to find something that wasn't there. "Where's breakfast?" I looked up from my book, a biography of Coco Chanel that Elena had mentioned as essential reading for anyone serious about fashion. "Good morning to you too. I mean, where's my breakfast? You always have it ready by now." I had breakfast. At 6:30, I marked my place in the book with a bookmark I'd made years ago from fabric scraps, back when I still took pleasure in small creative projects. "There are eggs in the refrigerator if you're hungry." He stood there for a moment, clearly expecting me to jump up and rectify this obvious oversight. When I didn't move, when I just continued reading about how Chanel had revolutionized women's fashion by freeing them from restrictive corsets. His confusion shifted to irritation. Are you serious right now? You're going to sit there reading while I have to make my own food? You're 24 years old, Liam. I think you can manage scrambled eggs. That's not the point. The point is you've always— The point, I interrupted, closing the book and looking at him directly, is that always doesn't mean forever. Things change. Something in my tone must have gotten his attention because he actually focused on me for the first time in months, really looked at me like he was seeing someone he didn't quite recognize. What's gotten into you lately? You've been acting weird all week. Weird. Because treating myself with basic dignity was apparently aberrant behavior in his worldview. I've been thinking, I said carefully, about what you said the other night. About how I let you treat me badly, so why should you treat me better? His face went slightly pale, like he was remembering words he'd thrown at me in anger and realizing they might have consequences. Mom, I didn't mean— You did mean it. And you were right, partially. I have been letting you treat me badly. But that's going to change. I stood up, rinsed my dishes, and headed for the door. I had errands to run. Banking, shopping for work clothes, getting my hair trimmed at the salon I'd been avoiding because it seemed too expensive for someone who spent her days being invisible. Where are you going? There was something almost panicked in his voice, like a child who'd suddenly realized his caregiver might not always be available. Out. I have things to do. What things? You never go anywhere during the day. I never used to go anywhere during the day. That's changing too. I left him standing in the kitchen, probably waiting for me to come back and explain myself, to reassure him that despite my strange behavior, I would still be available for whatever he needed. But I didn't come back. Instead, I drove to the bank and opened my own checking account, something I should have done months ago instead of allowing Liam access to the joint account where my sewing money had been mixing with his non-existent contributions. The bank manager, a pleasant woman named Carol who remembered me from when I'd been a regular customer before Liam's return, helped me transfer the small amount I had left into the new account. Starting fresh? She asked with the kind of knowing smile that suggested she'd helped other women reclaim their financial independence. Something like that, I said, signing the paperwork that would give me complete control over my own earnings for the first time in months. From the bank, I went to a department store downtown. Not the discount places where I'd been shopping for years, but a real department store where the clothes were displayed like they mattered, where the salespeople understood that helping women look their best was a profession worthy of respect. I need work clothes, I told the personal shopper who introduced herself as Margaret. Professional but not corporate. I'm starting a new job in fashion. Margaret was probably my age, with silver hair cut in a sophisticated bob and makeup that enhanced rather than disguised her features. She looked like someone who'd learned to invest in herself, who understood that appearance was a form of communication rather than vanity. Congratulations on the new job, she said, leading me to a section filled with clothes I'd been admiring from a distance for years. What's your budget? I named a figure that would have horrified me a month ago, but felt reasonable now that I knew what my weekly paycheck would be. Money spent on tools for success, rather than frivolous luxuries. An hour later, I had 3 outfits that made me look like someone who belonged in Elena's boutique. A charcoal gray dress with subtle detailing that showcased craftsmanship without being flashy. A navy blazer that could transform simple separates into professional ensembles. A cream-colored blouse made from silk so fine it felt like water against my skin. You have excellent taste, Margaret said as we finished the fitting. And you understand quality construction. You can tell by how you examine the seams and finishing. I smiled, remembering Elena's comment about recognizing fellow professionals. I've been sewing for 15 years. You learn to appreciate good workmanship. Well, you'll certainly represent your new workplace well. There's nothing more convincing than someone who obviously understands and values what they're selling. From the department store, I went to the salon I'd been driving past for months, the one with the elegant window display and prices that had always seemed impossibly extravagant. I need a cut and style, I told the receptionist. Something professional but not severe. I'm starting a new job on Monday. The stylist, a young man named David who treated my graying hair like it was something beautiful rather than something to be hidden, Worked with quiet concentration while we talked about color options and styling techniques. "You have gorgeous natural color," he said, combing out sections to examine them in the light. "We could enhance it rather than covering it. Bring out the silver highlights, add some depth to the base color. Enhance rather than cover." The concept was revolutionary to someone who'd been thinking of aging as something to be ashamed of, rather than something to be embraced with grace and style. 2 hours later, I looked in the salon mirror and saw someone I barely recognized. Not younger. I wasn't trying to pretend I was 35, but polished, confident, like someone who took herself seriously enough to invest in looking her best. "You look amazing," David said, styling the final touches. "Your husband is going to love it." "I'm not married," I said, the words feeling strange but liberating. "I'm doing this for me." When I got home that afternoon, carrying bags from the department store and wearing my new haircut like armor, the house felt different. Smaller somehow, like a place I was visiting rather than somewhere I belonged. Liam was in the living room with 2 friends I'd met briefly. Marcus and Tyler, both around his age, both unemployed as far as I could tell, both treating my house like their personal hangout spot. They looked up when I walked in, and I saw something shift in their expressions. Not recognition exactly, but a kind of surprised attention, like they'd suddenly noticed I was a person rather than just part of the furniture. "Whoa, Mrs. Morrison," Marcus said, his tone respectful in a way it had never been before. "You look really nice. Special occasion?" "Just taking better care of myself," I said, heading for the stairs with my shopping bags. "Mom?" Liam's voice stopped me at the bottom of the steps. "Can we talk?" "Later, I mean. After the guys leave." There was something different in his tone, too. Not the casual dismissal I'd grown accustomed to, but something that sounded almost like uncertainty. "Of course. I'll be in my room." I spent the evening organizing my new clothes, hanging them carefully in the section of the closet that had been empty since Liam had taken over most of the space. Each outfit represented possibility. Mornings when I would dress with purpose. Days when I would feel competent and valued. Evenings when I would come home tired but satisfied, rather than drained and resentful. At 10 o'clock, there was a soft knock on my bedroom door. "Mom, can I come in?" Liam entered hesitantly, like he was unsure of his welcome in a space he'd been taking for granted for months. He looked around the room, taking in the clothes laid out for Monday, the business cards from Elena's boutique on my dresser, the book about Coco Chanel on my nightstand. "You're really different lately," he said, sitting on the edge of my bed without invitation, but not with his usual assumption that everything in the house existed for his convenience. "I'm the same person I've always been. I'm just remembering who that person is." He was quiet for a long moment, picking at a loose thread on my comforter. When he finally looked up, there was something in his eyes I hadn't seen in years. Vulnerability. "Are you leaving?" The question hung in the air between us, loaded with implications I wasn't sure he fully understood. Was I leaving him? Leaving this house? Leaving the version of myself that had existed solely to serve his needs? "I'm starting a new job on Monday," I said carefully. "At a boutique downtown, full-time, with benefits. But you'll still live here, right? You'll still be here when I get home?" When I get home. As if this house, which I owned and maintained and filled with my presence, was primarily his space that I happened to occupy. "This is my house, Liam. I'm not going anywhere. But things are going to be different." "Different how?" I looked at my son. This young man who had somehow convinced himself that love meant never having to show gratitude, that family meant always having someone available to serve you without expecting anything in return, and felt something I hadn't felt in months. Not anger, though that was still there underneath. Not desperation for his approval, though part of me would probably always want that. What I felt was clarity. "Different in that I'm going to start living like someone who matters," I said quietly. "Different in that I'm going to expect to be treated with respect in my own home. Different in that your needs are no longer going to be the only ones that count in this relationship." He opened his mouth to respond, then closed it, like he was finally understanding that the comfortable dynamic we'd fallen into was no longer available to him. "I never said your needs don't count. You didn't have to say it. You showed it. Every day, with every dismissive comment, Every expectation that I should be grateful for the privilege of taking care of someone who couldn't be bothered to say thank you. Mom, I'm not finished. My voice was calm but firm, carrying the authority of someone who had finally decided she deserved to be heard. For months, I've been trying to figure out what I did wrong, why my love wasn't enough anymore, how I could change to make you happy. But I was asking the wrong questions. He looked at me with something that might have been the beginning of understanding, or maybe just fear that his comfortable situation was about to become more complicated. The right question is, why did I think it was acceptable to be treated badly by someone I love? And the answer is, because I taught you it was acceptable. Because I never showed you what it looks like to respect yourself. So you never learned to respect me. I stood up, smoothing down my new dress, feeling the confidence that came with knowing I would never again have to beg for basic courtesy in my own life. Starting Monday, I'll be working long days. I'll leave early and come home tired. I won't be available to cook elaborate meals or clean up after you or listen to you complain about how unfair life is while you refuse to take any steps to improve your situation. So what am I supposed to do? And there it was, the question that revealed everything. Not, how can I contribute? Or, how can I help? But what am I supposed to do? As if his comfort and convenience were still the primary concerns that needed to be addressed. You're supposed to figure it out, I said simply. You're supposed to do what every other adult in the world does. Take care of yourself and contribute to the household you live in. He left my room without another word, and I heard him on the phone shortly afterward, his voice low and urgent as he talked to someone who apparently provided the sympathy I was no longer available to offer. But for the first time in months, I didn't care who he was talking to or what he was saying about me. I didn't care if he was angry or hurt or confused by my sudden refusal to center my entire existence around his emotional needs. I cared about Monday morning, about walking into Threads and Dreams as someone who belonged there, about earning respect through skill rather than begging for it through sacrifice. I cared about the woman I was becoming, and she was someone worth caring about. Monday morning arrived with the kind of perfect autumn clarity that makes everything seem possible. I woke up at 6:30 without an alarm, my body somehow understanding that this was the first day of a different life. I took my time getting ready, savoring each step of the process. The silk blouse that felt like luxury against my skin, the charcoal dress that made me look professional and competent, the subtle makeup that enhanced rather than masked. When I looked in the mirror, I saw someone who belonged in Elena's beautiful boutique, someone who deserved to be paid well for work she took pride in. Downstairs, I made coffee and toast for one, eating while I read the morning news on my phone. The kitchen was quiet and peaceful, filled with golden October light that made even my modest breakfast feel like a celebration. I was rinsing my dishes when Liam appeared in the doorway, still in his pajamas, hair disheveled from sleep. He looked around the kitchen with the bewildered expression I'd grown accustomed to, searching for the breakfast that wasn't there. I have to leave in 10 minutes, I said, before he could ask the question that was already forming on his lips. My first day starts at 9, and I want to arrive early. But what about... He gestured vaguely at the empty kitchen, as if the absence of food prepared for him was a natural disaster requiring immediate attention. What about what? Breakfast? Coffee? You know, the stuff you always have ready. I had breakfast. At 7, there's coffee in the pot if you want some. He stared at me like I'd started speaking a foreign language. You're really going to leave without making me anything to eat? I'm going to leave because I have a job to get to, just like millions of other people do every morning. I picked up my purse, a new one I'd bought to go with my professional clothes, and headed for the door. Behind me, I could hear Liam making the kind of frustrated noise that children make when adults stop providing services they've come to see as automatic. When will you be home? He called after me. Late. It's my first day, so I want to stay as long as Elena needs me. What am I supposed to do for dinner? I turned around in the doorway and looked at my 24-year-old son, who was asking what he was supposed to do for dinner like it was a complex philosophical problem rather than a basic adult responsibility. I suppose you'll figure it out, I said calmly. Just like you figured out breakfast. The drive downtown felt like a journey to a different planet. For months, I'd barely left the house except for grocery shopping and the occasional errand. The world outside my kitchen had become foreign, intimidating, full of people who had important places to go and meaningful work to do. But this morning, I was one of them. I had somewhere important to be, work that mattered, skills that would be valued and compensated fairly. Elena was unlocking the front door of Threads and Dreams when I arrived, and she smiled when she saw me approaching. Punctual. I like that. She looked me up and down appraisingly, not in a way that made me feel judged, but in the way one professional evaluates another's readiness for serious work. And you look perfect. Polished but not overdone. Our clients will trust you immediately. Inside, the boutique was even more beautiful in the morning light. The fabrics seemed to glow. The carefully arranged displays suggested possibilities I'd only dreamed about during my years of dining room sewing. "Let me show you your station," Elena said, leading me to the back workroom. "Margaret left detailed notes about current projects, and I've scheduled you some time with 3 of our best clients this week so you can get a feel for the consultation process." My station was everything I'd imagined when I'd been cramped at my dining room table, working under inadequate lighting with tools that were functional but not optimal. Professional-grade machines, perfect lighting, a cutting table large enough to handle the most elaborate gowns. "This is where magic happens," Elena said, running her hand along the cutting table, "where we take women's dreams and make them reality. Dreams made reality, not just hemming pants or taking in seams, but creating something that would make women feel beautiful, confident, special, work that mattered in ways that went beyond simple functionality." The morning flew by in orientation activities, reviewing client files, learning the boutique's systems, familiarizing myself with the inventory of fabrics and notions that far exceeded anything I'd ever had access to. At lunch, Elena took me to a small cafe nearby where women who worked in the downtown business district came to eat salads and discuss everything from quarterly reports to their children's college applications. "You seem different from when I first met you," Elena said over soup and sandwiches. "More settled somehow, more sure of yourself." "I am different," I said, surprising myself with the honesty. 2 years ago, I was still trying to be everything to everyone else. Now I'm trying to be enough for myself. Elena nodded like she understood exactly what I meant. It's amazing how much energy we waste trying to earn love from people who've decided we're not worth loving. Once you stop doing that, you have so much more to give to people who actually appreciate what you have to offer. People who've decided we're not worth loving. The phrase hit me with uncomfortable accuracy, but instead of the usual pain, I felt something lighter. Relief, maybe. Or just the satisfaction of being understood by someone who'd probably walked a similar path. The afternoon brought my first client consultation, Mrs. Williams, a woman in her 60s who needed alterations on a mother-of-the-bride dress for her daughter's upcoming wedding. "I've gained a little weight since I bought this," she said apologetically, like her body's changes were a personal failing rather than a natural part of aging. "Bodies change," I said, examining the dress with the practiced eye I'd developed over 15 years of fitting real women rather than perfect mannequins. "Good tailoring accommodates that. Let's see what we can do to make this dress perfect for you as you are now." An hour later, Mrs. Williams was looking at herself in the mirror with tears in her eyes. Not tears of frustration, but tears of joy at seeing herself look elegant and confident in a dress that had been expertly adjusted to flatter her current figure rather than the figure she'd had 20 pounds ago. "You're a miracle worker," she said, and I felt the kind of professional satisfaction I'd almost forgotten was possible. This was what I'd been missing during my months of invisible servitude, the recognition that my skills had value, that my work made a difference in people's lives, that I was capable of creating beauty and confidence rather than just cleaning up after other people's messes. By closing time, I was exhausted but exhilarated. Elena walked me to the door, reviewing the next day's schedule and praising my work with the kind of specific, professional feedback I'd been starving for without realizing it. "You're going to be perfect for this job," she said. "I can already tell that our clients are going to love working with you." The drive home was different from the drive to work that morning. Instead of nervous anticipation, I felt quiet satisfaction. Instead of wondering if I belonged in the professional world, I knew I did. But as I pulled into my driveway at 7:30 that evening, I could see that the peace and confidence I'd built throughout the day was about to be tested. Every light in the house was on. Liam's car was in the driveway along with two others I didn't recognize. Through the front windows, I could see shadows moving around, and when I opened the front door, I was hit with the smell of fast food and the sound of multiple conversations happening at once. The living room had been transformed into what looked like a fraternity party. Marcus and Tyler were there, along with three other young men I'd never seen before. Empty pizza boxes covered my coffee table, beer cans lined the mantelpiece, and someone had apparently spilled something dark on the carpet I'd been carefully maintaining for years. They all looked up when I entered, and the conversations died abruptly. 5 pairs of eyes taking in my professional appearance, my obvious exhaustion, my complete lack of enthusiasm for finding my home turned into a bachelor pad while I was at work. "Hey, Mom," Liam said with forced cheerfulness, like he was trying to convince himself as much as me that this scene was perfectly normal. "How was your first day?" I looked around the room slowly, taking inventory of the damage. The throw pillows I'd arranged that morning were on the floor. Someone had left wet rings on my wooden end tables. The lamp I'd inherited from my mother had been moved to accommodate someone's gaming setup. "It was excellent," I said finally, my voice calm despite the rage building in my chest. "I learned a lot about professional standards and mutual respect." One of the strangers, a kid who looked barely old enough to drink legally, snorted with laughter. "Professional standards? That's hilarious." "What's hilarious about it?" I asked, turning my full attention to him. He looked uncomfortable suddenly, like he hadn't expected to be challenged by someone he'd dismissed as irrelevant. "I just mean, like, you're a seamstress. It's not exactly Wall Street." The casual contempt in his voice was so familiar, it almost didn't hurt. Almost. But then I looked around the room again, at my home being treated like a place that didn't matter by people who didn't matter. At my son sitting in the middle of it all like this was exactly what he'd intended. And something inside me that had been carefully contained all day finally broke free. "Everyone out." The words came out quietly, but there was something in my tone that cut through the ambient noise like a blade. The room went completely silent. "I'm sorry?" Liam said, like he hadn't heard me correctly. "I said everyone out. Now. This isn't a dormitory or a fraternity house. It's my home, and I want these people gone immediately. Mom, come on. It's not that big a deal. We were just hanging out. Hanging out in my living room, eating food you didn't pay for, making messes you have no intention of cleaning up, while I worked a 10-hour day to pay for the roof over your ungrateful head." The stranger who'd made the crack about my profession looked like he wanted to disappear into the couch cushions. The others were exchanging glances that suggested they'd suddenly realized they might be witnessing something more serious than a minor domestic disagreement. "We can clean up," Marcus offered weakly. "You can leave," I said, my voice still controlled but carrying the kind of authority I'd learned from watching Elena handle difficult situations all day. "All of you, right now." "Dude, maybe we should go," Tyler said, already reaching for his jacket. "Yeah, no, we should definitely go," another one agreed. They filed out quickly, mumbling apologies and avoiding eye contact, leaving Liam and me alone in the wreckage of what used to be my peaceful living room. "That was completely unnecessary," Liam said when the front door closed behind the last of his friends. "They weren't hurting anything. They were in my house without my permission, making messes I'll have to clean up, showing zero respect for my property or my space, just like you've been doing for months. It's not just your house. I live here too. You live here because I allow you to live here, because I've been supporting you while you refuse to support yourself, but that dynamic is over." He stared at me like I was someone he'd never seen before. "What do you mean over?" "I mean that as of today, things are going to change dramatically. I have a job now, a real job that pays well and uses my skills and treats me with respect. I don't need to tolerate being treated badly in my own home by someone who contributes nothing but attitude and entitlement." "So, what are you saying?" I looked at my son, this young man who had somehow convinced himself that love meant never having to show gratitude, never having to contribute, never having to treat the person who'd sacrificed everything for him with basic human decency, and felt the last of my maternal guilt finally fall away. "I'm saying you have 30 days to find a job and start contributing to this household, or you need to find somewhere else to live." The words hung in the air between us, final and non-negotiable. For the first time in months, maybe years, I had said exactly what I meant without softening it or apologizing for it or leaving room for negotiation. You can't be serious. I've never been more serious about anything in my life. Liam looked around the destroyed living room, then back at me, and I could see him calculating whether his usual combination of charm and guilt-tripping would work on this version of his mother. Where am I supposed to go? What am I supposed to do? You're supposed to figure it out, I said, echoing the words I'd used that morning when he'd asked what he was supposed to do for dinner. You're supposed to do what every other adult does when they can't afford to live independently. You find a way to afford it, or you accept that your living situation comes with expectations and responsibilities. Mom, I can't just— You can, and you will. Because the alternative is being homeless, which I imagine would be significantly less comfortable than getting a job and behaving like a decent human being. I walked past him toward the stairs, stepping over pizza crusts and empty cans, feeling lighter with each step despite the mess I'd have to deal with tomorrow. This isn't over, he called after me. I turned around at the bottom of the stairs and looked at him one last time. You're right. It's not over. It's just beginning. And for the first time in your adult life, you're going to have to decide what kind of person you want to be when there aren't any excuses left. In my room, I changed into comfortable clothes and sat on my bed, looking out the window at the neighborhood I'd called home for so many years. Tomorrow I would go back to Threads and Dreams and continue building a life that belonged entirely to me. Tomorrow, Liam would have to face the reality that his mother was no longer available to absorb his failures and enable his selfishness. Tonight, for the first time in longer than I could remember, I felt proud of who I was becoming. The woman who had begged for respect was gone. In her place was someone who simply expected it, and was finally in a position to enforce that expectation. 3 weeks after I gave Liam his ultimatum, I was putting the finishing touches on a wedding dress that would have been impossible to create in my old dining room setup. The bride was a young woman whose mother had worn a similar dress in 1985, and we were recreating the vintage silhouette with modern fabrics and updated construction techniques. It's perfect, the bride whispered, tears in her eyes as she looked at herself in Threads and Dreams' three-way mirror. It's exactly what I dreamed of. This was what I'd been missing for so many years. The moment when skill and artistry came together to make someone's most important day more beautiful. Elena watched from the corner, smiling with the satisfaction of someone who'd made exactly the right hiring decision. Nadine is our newest treasure, she told the bride's mother. We're lucky to have her. Lucky to have me. After months of being treated like a burden, like someone whose presence was barely tolerated, hearing those words felt like stepping into sunlight after a long winter. My phone buzzed with a text message as the bride and her mother were settling their final payment. I glanced at the screen and saw Liam's name, along with words I'd been expecting but had stopped hoping for. Mom, can we talk? I'm in the parking lot. Through the boutique's front window, I could see him sitting in his car, looking smaller and less certain than I'd seen him in years. For 3 weeks we'd barely spoken. He'd been leaving the house early and coming home late, making his own meals and cleaning up after himself with the grudging efficiency of someone who'd finally realized his other options had been eliminated. Take your time, Elena said, noticing my distraction. I'll handle the final details here. Liam got out of his car when he saw me approaching. He was wearing a button-down shirt I'd never seen before and pants that actually fit properly. His hair was combed, his face freshly shaved. He looked like someone who'd been making an effort to present himself professionally. Hi, Mom. His voice was quieter than usual, lacking the casual entitlement I'd grown so accustomed to. Hello, Liam. You look nice. I got a job. The words came out in a rush, like he'd been practicing them. At Morrison Financial Services downtown. It's entry-level, but it has benefits and growth potential, and they seem to think I have promise. Morrison Financial Services. I knew the company, a mid-sized firm with a solid reputation, the kind of place where someone could build a real career if they were willing to work hard and prove themselves. Congratulations. That's wonderful news. We stood there in the afternoon sunshine, mother and son, both of us navigating territory we'd never explored before. He looked like he wanted to say something but wasn't sure how to begin. I owe you an apology, he said finally. A big one. For everything. For how I've been treating you. For taking advantage of your kindness. For making you feel like your own feelings didn't matter. The apology was more than I'd expected, more thoughtful and specific than the generic "I'm sorry" I might have gotten in the past. But I waited, sensing there was more. "I've been thinking about what you said, about how I treated you badly because you let me, and I realized that's not actually true. I treated you badly because I chose to, because somewhere along the way, I decided that loving me meant you'd accept anything from me, no matter how awful." He looked down at the pavement, then back up at my face, meeting my eyes for the first time in months. "I don't know when I became that person. I don't know when I started thinking that you owed me everything and I owed you nothing. But I know it was wrong, and I know I need to change." These were words I'd dreamed of hearing for so long that actually hearing them felt surreal. Part of me wanted to cry with relief, to rush forward and hug him and tell him everything was forgiven. But the new version of myself, the woman who'd learned to value her own dignity, held back. "I appreciate the apology, Liam. I really do. But I need to know that you understand this isn't just about saying sorry. It's about fundamental changes in how we treat each other going forward." He nodded, and I could see him working through the implications. I know I can't just apologize and expect everything to go back to the way it was. I wouldn't want it to go back to the way it was. Not for you, anyway. You were miserable, and I was making you miserable, and I was too selfish to care. The honesty was painful but necessary. This was the first real conversation we'd had in years, maybe ever. The first time he'd acknowledged that my feelings mattered, that my happiness was something worth considering. "I want to contribute to the household," he continued. "Not just financially, though I'll be able to do that now. I want to contribute to making it a place where we both feel comfortable and respected. A place where we both felt comfortable and respected." The concept was so foreign to our recent dynamic that it took me a moment to imagine what that might look like. "What does that mean to you?" I asked. "It means I do my share of the housework without being asked. It means I don't bring people over without checking with you first. It means I treat you like someone whose opinions and preferences matter, not just someone who exists to make my life easier." He paused, seeming to gather courage for what came next. "And it means I accept that you have your own life now, your own job, your own interests, your own priorities that don't revolve around me. I've been watching you these past few weeks, seeing how much happier you are when you come home from work, and I realize that you're not just my mother. You're a person with your own dreams and ambitions, and I've been treating you like a side character in my story instead of the main character in your own." The main character in my own story? I'd never thought of it that way, but he was right. For so long, I'd defined myself entirely in relation to other people, as someone's wife, someone's mother, someone's employee. I'd forgotten that I was also simply Nadine, a woman with her own hopes and talents and right to happiness. "I love working at the boutique," I said, surprising myself with how easily the admission came. "I love the creativity, the problem-solving, the way I feel when I help someone look and feel their best. I love earning money through work that challenges me and values what I can do." "I can tell. You're different when you talk about it. Happier. More yourself, I guess. More myself." Yes, that was exactly what I'd been feeling. Like I was finally becoming the person I'd always had the potential to be, before I'd learned to shrink myself down to fit into other people's expectations. "I met someone," I said, the words surprising both of us. I hadn't planned to mention David, the gentleman who'd been patiently asking me to dinner for 2 weeks, while I figured out whether I was ready to think of myself as someone who deserved to be courted. Liam's eyebrows went up, but his expression wasn't the dismissive skepticism I might have expected a month ago. "Someone from work?" "A client's uncle. He came in while she was being fitted for a cocktail dress, and we started talking about books. He's retired from teaching high school English, volunteers at the library downtown. He's asked me to dinner several times." "Are you going to say yes?" The question was asked with genuine curiosity, rather than possessiveness or judgment. Like he actually cared about my happiness, rather than just how my choices might affect him. "I think I am. This weekend, maybe. There's a new restaurant downtown that's supposed to have excellent food and quiet conversation." Liam smiled, and for the first time in years, it was the kind of smile that reached his eyes. "That sounds perfect for you. You deserve someone who appreciates how special you are. You deserve someone who appreciates how special you are. Words I'd needed to hear from him for so long, finally offered freely, rather than extracted through manipulation or guilt. "Thank you," I said simply. "Can I ask you something?" His voice was hesitant again, like he was afraid of overstepping new boundaries he was still learning to navigate. "Of course. Would you be willing to have dinner with me? Not because you have to, not because I need taking care of, but because we're family, and maybe we can figure out how to be good family to each other?" I looked at this young man who'd put on a clean shirt and found himself a job and was actually asking for my time instead of assuming he was entitled to it, and felt something shift in my chest. Not the desperate maternal love that had been enabling his worst behaviors, but something healthier. Affection mixed with respect, hope tempered with realistic expectations. "I'd like that," I said. "But I cook dinner on Sunday afternoons now, after I get home from work. If you want to join me, you're welcome. If you want to help prepare it, even better." "I'd love to help. I've been teaching myself to cook since you stopped doing it for me, and I'm getting pretty good at it. Maybe I can contribute something to the meal instead of just showing up to eat it." Contributing instead of just showing up to eat. The phrase summarized everything that had been wrong with our relationship and everything that might be right about its future. Sunday it is then. As I watched him drive away to start his new job, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Pride in my son that wasn't mixed with resentment or exhaustion. He was becoming someone worth being proud of. But more importantly, I was becoming someone who didn't need his success to validate my own worth. That evening I called David and accepted his dinner invitation for Saturday night. Then I called Elena to confirm that I'd be working the trunk show next month, showcasing our most elegant pieces for the boutique's most discerning clientele. Then I sat in my peaceful living room, clean and organized according to my preferences rather than anyone else's, and allowed myself to feel something I hadn't felt in longer than I could remember. Contentment. Not the desperate happiness that comes from other people finally treating you well, but the quiet satisfaction that comes from treating yourself well, from building a life that reflects your values, your interests, your right to be respected and valued. 6 months ago, I'd been standing in the rain, locked out of my own home, holding someone else's forgotten phone and wondering how love had become so painful. Now I was sitting in my own space, planning dinner with a kind man who appreciated intelligence and conversation, preparing for work that challenged and rewarded me, looking forward to a relationship with my son that was based on mutual respect rather than one-sided sacrifice. I'd learned something important in these months of transformation. Love without respect isn't love at all. It's something else. Need, maybe, or habit, or fear. But it isn't the kind of love that makes people better or happier or more themselves. Real love, I'd discovered, makes space for everyone involved to grow and contribute and be appreciated for who they are, rather than what they provide. And sometimes, when you stop accepting less than you deserve, the people who matter find ways to give you what you've always been worth. But the most important lesson was this: even if they don't, even if no one else ever sees your value, you can still choose to see it yourself. You can still build a life that honors who you are and what you're capable of. You can still be the main character in your own story. As I got ready for bed that night, I looked in the mirror and saw someone I was proud to be. Not perfect, not without scars from the journey, but strong and dignified and finally free to love herself as much as she'd always loved everyone else. And that, I realized, had been the real victory all along.